What's up everyone, it's a knife style here, and today I'm going to be doing a video that I've been really excited to do for a while now. I'm going to be comparing the Sebenza to the Umnumzaan, and this is a comparison that happens a lot in the Chris Reeve knife community. A lot of times someone is asking, alright, what should be my first Chris Reeve knife? Usually they ask Inkosi, Umnumzaan, or Sebenza. I don't have an Inkosi, so hopefully when I get one in the future, I will do a video comparing all three of them. One thing to keep in mind is there's a good chance that if you buy one of them, you're probably going to end up with the other sometime soon, because the collection of Chris Reeve knives kind of builds up over time. But yeah, these are two knives that are two of my favorites. I really like them, and so even though I'm excited to make this video and to do this comparison, I'm also kind of dreading having to deal with choosing which one I like over the other. So let's get started. And actually the Umnumzaan looks bigger right now. It's just kind of the illusion that gets thrown off because my camera is at an angle. So these are basically about the exact same size. And for the anatomy, these two knives are very similar. The only difference is I wish that I had a large Sebenza plain Jane version, which if you guys don't know what plain Jane is, that's pretty much just like this. The regular bead blasted handle scales with the blue thumb stud, the blue standoff here, and the regular drop point blade. This could also be classified as a plain Jane and Singo. I wish I had a drop point blade on a plain Jane large 21, and that would be, I feel like, a better comparison to the Umnumzaan because they both are $450. But this is my favorite Sebenza that I have, so we're just gonna have to work with it. I did own a 31 with the drop point blade and the regular titanium handle scale, so I know what it feels like. I know it just fine. So we are going to do this comparison right here. Let's take a look at, or I guess let me just talk about the anatomy, the buildup of these knives, and it is actually very similar. Both these knives have S35VN blades. They're both made out of 6AL4V titanium. They're both titanium frame locks. They're both hollow ground, made in the USA by Chris Reeve Knives. They both share the same pocket clip, and there are differences. I'll talk about that. The Sebenza comes with the Insingo blade, drop point blade, and a Tonto blade. The Umnumzaan just comes with a drop point blade and a Tonto blade. So now let's move on to the looks of these two knives, and in my opinion both of these are very, very good looking. Some of my favorite knives just to look at, which is kind of weird, but they just look great. Looking at the blade on the Sebenza, we have this nice machine ground swedge up top on the Insingo grind, and that mixed with the polished stonewash of the blade, I feel like gives a really nice contrast. It's kind of, my lighting's a little bit extreme here, but I think that it looks really good. Also, the bead blast finish on here I think looks great. Just a little bit of darker titanium with a lighter blade looks good. And also over time you will develop some snail trails just hitting stuff in your pocket, and that little bit of wear I feel like gives it character and makes it look good over time. The micarta inlays look great, and just the overall lines of the Sebenza look so simple and so good, in my opinion. A lot of people think, oh, this is just a classy, delicate gentleman knife, or gentleman's knife, however you want to say it. But I think it can really be a good workhorse, and it just looks great in any kind of way that you would like to carry it. Now let's move on to the Umnumzaan and the looks of it. And once again, the blade looks great. It's got a polished stonewash on the main part of it, and then on the swedge we have that machine kind of satin finish that also looks good in contrast with it. That double harpoon just looks so cool in my opinion, and I really like the milling that's done on this titanium. I feel like it would have looked fine if they just left it normal, but I do think that that adds a little bit of touch to that cool factor, and I like the Chris Reeve Knives logo on that lock bar over travel stop right there. So overall, very good looking knives. They are just very, very cool. Now let's move on to the blade of those. That looks category doesn't mean that much to me, but that's just my opinion, I guess. If I had to choose, I would say the Umnumzaan probably looks cooler in my opinion. Now let's talk about these blades. And the blades are pretty much identical if you're talking drop point versus drop point, except for the blade stock thickness. So I did a measurement before this video, and the stock thickness on the Umnumzaan is about 3.5 millimeters, while on the Sebenza it's about 3 millimeters. It's not really, I don't usually measure in millimeters because I'm not that familiar with the metric system, but it was kind of an easy comparison, just a 0.5 millimeter in difference between these two. And they both have the same hollow grind to them, so it kind of confuses people. But the Inkosi made by Reeve Knives actually has a large hollow grind, which it sounds a little bit odd, but the reason it's called a large hollow grind is because the contact wheel that they grind the knife on has a larger radius than the contact wheel that they grind the Umnumzaan and the Sebenza on. So what that means is that with a smaller radius contact wheel, you are getting a deeper hollow grind, basically making it thinner behind the edge, and over time it won't thicken up as much with sharpening. So I do prefer the grind on these two. I'm glad that they went with this style instead of what they did with the Inkosi. The Inkosi's fine, and I feel like that would also be a really good hard use knife next to both of these, but I just don't think it's going to be that much of a difference that you'll notice. Like, I don't feel like there's anything you'll do where you would not break the Inkosi and break the Sebenza. You know, I feel like if you're going to break a knife doing something stupid, you're going to break any of these knives in this class. But I think it's going to have to be something really stupid to do that. That's just my thoughts, and I'd rather have more cutting performance and more longevity over time with sharpenings. So comparing the drop point blades to each other with the drop point Sebenza and the drop point Umnumzaan, or I guess one thing I'll talk about is one thing that I like about the Sebenza is that it offers the Insingo blade shape while the Umnumzaan line does not. If you guys are not sure, or if you guys haven't heard me say this before, the Insingo is my favorite blade shape of any blade shape on any knife that I own. I feel like it's the perfect combination of utility cuts with this low tip where you can still get a lot of power behind it, and slicing ability with this gradual belly throughout. It's just the perfect blade shape for me. And the Umnumzaan doesn't offer that. Honestly, it's kind of hard to imagine an Insingo blade on here just with this swedge. They probably wouldn't be able to do that, or at least not a double swedge. But it's still, I still would like to see it offered. Can't really imagine it. Don't think they'll do it because they haven't done it already. But I guess that is one advantage. If you know you want the Insingo blade shape, obviously you're gonna have to go with the Sebenza. But one thing comparing the drop point of the Umnumzaan to the drop point of the 21, the thickness at the tip on the Umnumzaan is actually thinner. It doesn't thicken up at the tip like the 21 does. As you can see with this hollow grind, just look at this flat here and follow along. See how it's perfectly flat right there? And then it tapers up a little bit towards the top. Just imagine someone grinding that. I assume they go like that, not really sure, never ground a knife before, so I don't want to act like I know more than I actually know. But they're taking it like that, I assume, and what that's doing is that is removing material towards the tip and keeping it actually thinner towards the tip on the Umnumzaan. What this does is if you sharpen on a guided system like a KME, let's say this is at 20 degrees per side from the factory, you just keep it at 20 degrees and it won't thicken up at that tip, which is a nice thing. If you did that on a Sebenza 21, I believe they might have fixed the issue on the 31. I'm not completely positive, but if you did that, the issue you would see is that bevel would look much wider at the tip than down there. Not really that big of a deal, and there's always advantages and disadvantages with a thicker tip. The advantage being it has more strength for like prying forces. The disadvantage, it doesn't have as much cutting capability for your basic EDC tasks. So I guess if you're comparing the drop point blade of the Umnumzaan to the drop point blade of the Sebenza, they're pretty much the same thing. But I would have to go with the Umnumzaan just because it's thinner at the tip and I'm mainly doing EDC things, and I don't think it's something that you notice in a hard use testing comparing, oh wow, the Sebenza is just so much better because it's slightly thicker at the tip. You know, I just don't really think it's going to be that big of a deal. One thing where I think the Sebenza just outright wins with the blade portion is this choil right here. As you can see, it's a very, very deep choil. I like how they cut it, just kind of the 45-degree angle right there. And look how much sharpening life you're going to get out of this. You're going to have to sharpen all the way up to here before it starts thickening up behind the edge and you start getting a smile. And I mean, that's got to be like 20 years of use and sharpening. And if you keep your knife stropped up pretty good, you're never going to run into that issue for a very long time. So I think it's just cool how long this knife lasts. I really feel like by the time you get it to there, you're probably going to own 5 or 6 CRKs already, and you'll be happy to have this as kind of a badge of honor trophy hanging up for you. I don't even know what I'm saying, but it still is cool. This knife is going to last you a long time without ever looking like it has a choil or really thickening up on that blade. For the Umnumzaan, it won't be thickening up really, but it doesn't have the best sharpening choil here. You can see that they cut one in, but you might be able to see almost the shadow of that plunge grind there. It's a sweeping plunge, and so a couple more sharpenings and you're going to kind of see a defined smile there, which isn't my favorite thing in the world. And I feel like they just could have done a little bit of a better job with that. I don't know what they could have done, or it almost looks like the Umnumzaan, you see the very back of the plunge is right there. You know, it's not inside this titanium scale, while on the Sebenza it is. So they just kind of have more area to work with a choil. So for that reason, I probably prefer the Sebenza blade just for sharpening over time. One of the best choils, probably the best choil I've ever seen on a knife. The Insingo blade is my favorite. If you are looking, if you know you want a drop point blade, I probably will go with would point you more towards the Umnumzaan, because the tip is a little bit thinner on there and easier to use with a guided system. Now keep in mind, with freehand on the Umnumzaan, it was a little bit of it took a little bit to get used to, because I'm used to knives thickening up at the tip for drop point blades. So when I sharpen, it's almost like you're sharpening like this and you raise your elbow so that you hit that tip. With this one, it's almost like you did a motion like that. Almost, it's kind of hard to see, just so you weren't moving your angle up and micro beveling at that tip. It took a little bit to get used to, but I'd rather have it thinner at the tip than thicker. So always an advantage and disadvantage with things like this. I've rambled on too much about the blade. Overall, these blades are nearly identical. There's only little differences between them, but I prefer the Sebenza blade because you get the option with the Insingo and you get a better sharpening choil. Now let's move on to the fit and finish and lockup. And fit and finish is both the same on these things. Very, very tight tolerances, perfect centering on the Umnumzaan. Sorry, that's not the best lighting. Still not very good, but here it is on the Sebenza. Once again, both of these knives are perfectly centered. No blade play, no lock rock on either two of these. They use different lock bar interface systems. So this one has a ceramic ball, and that is what comes in contact with the tang of the blade. So it's not actually the titanium scale that's coming in contact with the tang of the blade. You can see, hopefully you can see there. My lights are not really cooperating with me today, but that is the groove that the ceramic ball will wear in there over time. And a lot of people kind of freak out about this. They're like, well, if that wears a groove all the way through the blade, you're not really going to have a usable lock anymore once it develops a little bit of lock rock. And my thought is, yes, that's a valid argument and it makes sense, but it's going to take a really long time to wear through that much material of the blade. And at that point, your knife is going to be so old, it will probably be time for a whole new reblade. It'll probably be sharpened all the way up to here by the time that ever comes to that. So I think people really nitpick and freak out about which lock interface system is better. My choice for which one would probably be just the carburized lock on this, or the carburized lock face on this. But they both are fine. I really have no issues with it. And I apologize if I'm wrong. You know, I said carburized. It's like carburized, carbidized. I always get them mixed up. I just need to have like it hanging up on my wall what it actually is, because I mess this up in like every single Sebenza video. But what they do is they just heat up the lock face here, so it's not, it's almost hardened titanium that comes in contact with the tang of that blade, making it have little or less wear over time than if it was just the regular titanium coming in contact with it. I don't have any issues with either, but I do like this. These locks have definitely stood the test of time. They have a later lockup than your average knife, but they stay like this. They do not really move over. I've never really seen a Sebenza at 100% lockup, unless it's something that someone messed up when they put it back together wrong or something like that. but very late or pretty late lockup on these. But I actually really like it because it means you're getting a solid strong lock, and you're not going to be at any risk in this thing failing on you, especially when you're holding it like this, because you're kind of pressing that lock bar in more this way, locking it up a little bit stronger. So both very well done frame locks on this. If I had to pick one, I guess I picked the Sebenza, but it's nothing you should really be worried about. The Sebenza 31 has the ceramic ball interface, which has had some issues just because I guess maybe they weren't really used to taking the step to using it on the 31, but I don't know what to think about it. I did a full video. I always get asked to do this, but a comparison on the 31 and the 21. I have that video. It's a while back there on my YouTube channel, but I actually have a playlist called Choosing Your First Sebenza. So if you watch this video and you're like, you know, I think I'm gonna go with the Sebenza, I actually have a playlist where I go through which blade shape I prefer, which handle, or like if I like inlays or just the regular titanium, if I like the large or the small. So hopefully that can help you out in your purchasing decision. And I talk about the 21 versus 31. I just wanted to bring that up because I get asked that question a lot, like what is the difference between the two? So let me talk real quick about the construction of these two knives. So the pivot, I guess assembly, would you call it, is different between these. On the Sebenza, it uses a bushing inside of the pivot, and what the bushing does is it makes it where this screw can only be tightened down to a certain amount. And so that's when you hear people say, yep, I took my Sebenza apart, put it back together. After I put it back together, tightened everything down, and the action was good, no blade play, and nice and smooth, perfectly centered and right how it was from the factory. That's because the pivot bushing only allows it to go down a certain amount. And I really like that. I think it's very easy to take apart, and it is a good system. Now, where the pivot bushing has some issues is with companies that use it that don't have as good of attention to detail and as tight of tolerances as they do, as Chris Reeve Knives does. The issues with it is, let's say that or just imagine this in your head. Sorry that I'm not the best at describing it, but you got a blade in there, you have washers on each side, and you have a pivot bushing going through the whole of that blade, and then you have the titanium, and then you have screws going across. So the phosphor bronze is coming in contact, or the phosphor bronze is coming in contact with the titanium, and the pivot bushing should be coming in contact with the blade or the inside of the blade. But if you sand down those phosphor bronze washers, like let's say you're polishing the washers on your Sebenza and you sand them down, and then that makes it where the pivot bushing sticks out further than the phosphor bronze washers. That will create a gap between the titanium and the phosphor bronze, and you can't tighten that screw down anymore because that pivot bushing is pressing up against it. And so then that's where you get horizontal blade play, just because there's that little bit of room between the titanium and the phosphor bronze washers. So that's why I don't want to see a pivot bushing on every single production knife ever, because unless they can get the tolerances down like they do over at the Chris Reeve Knives factory, I don't think it's worth it, because you'll probably run into some issues with the quality control on those. How it is on the Umnumzaan is just like any other knife out there. There is no pivot bushing. You can loosen up this pivot a little bit and the action will be a little bit snappier. What I do when I put this knife back together is I tighten it up until perfect centering, like it is right now, and then usually I can flick it out no problem, and it has no blade play. Also, these external stops on here help with that no blade play. What they do, they just sit further up, giving it a little bit more strength, because they decrease the, what would that be, the lever or the distance between the point of motion and where you are applying the torque. And I'm sounding like a know-it-all right now. I should just talk different. But what that does is you're not going to be able to get as much force on the internals of this knife. They will be directed towards this stop pin or those thumb studs right there, instead of having to travel through the stop pin back there. So that's why external thumb studs are better for hard use if you're going to be doing some prying. I've never really run into the issues, but I do like external thumb studs a lot more. And so I would suggest, if you're going for the ultimate hard user, the Umnumzaan might be the one to look for, because you have those external studs and it's a lot simpler in construction. Or not a lot, both these knives are very simple, but one cool thing about the Umnumzaan is there is no stop pin. As you see here, the stop pin is this right there, and that's what the back of this blade hits on right here, keeping the blade from being pushed farther this way. And so there is no stop pin on the Umnumzaan because, like I just showed, the external stops hit right there, and that's keeping it from going this way. And also there is no stop pin for the closed position because those thumb studs act as this, or they hit up against the titanium, keeping that blade from going farther down into these handles. So I think it's really cool how there's just a pivot and a body screw and the pocket clip screw, and that's all you have here for the construction of the Umnumzaan. Very simple knife. You know, I feel like the more the knife world increases, the more the complicated the parts are with a knife. And I just think it's cool to see knives that are so simple and that just work so well and are able to be taken apart and put back together so nicely. Now let's move on to the ergonomics between these two. So the ergonomics, this is one where I think that the Sebenza wins over the Umnumzaan, and especially the inlaid Sebenza. So with the inlaid Sebenza, comparing this to the Umnumzaan, as you can see, the inlays on the Sebenza are thicker. They make it thicker than the Umnumzaan, and that just makes it more hand-filling. And this is probably one of the most comfortable knives I own. It's just one of the best. I really like it. One thing that I just want to point out with these two knives is they both have straight, I guess, spines to the handles there. And what that does, which I really like, so that's why both of the ergos on these knives are great. I like that because when you're doing a cut where you're pressing straight down like this, that energy is not directed towards one spot like you would see with something like a Spyderco Manix, not like this spot right here. What it's doing is it is directing all of the energy of that cut to the entire length of your hand here, really making it make you feel less uncomfort over a long period of cutting. So for the Sebenza, the reason I like the ergos more is just the ergonomic lines are simpler. As you can see, it's just one small indent there and then straight there and straight back here. So you can hold this knife right here, right here. This pinch grip is one that I really like and use all the time. You can put your thumb up here, really get some detailed work right there, which is a cut that I'd more likely do with the small. You can hold it like this, really any way you can imagine reverse grip if you are tactical. But I just think that the Sebenza is one of the most comfortable knives out there because of how simple the ergonomic lines are for it. And the regular plain Jane Sebenza, which is the regular titanium handle scales, it's also very comfortable. It's just not as hand-filling, so it doesn't feel as good as this, but it still feels pretty good, and there really isn't any hot spots in use. The Umnumzaan, also one of my most comfortable knives, one that I really like. I like this first harpoon here because you can put your thumb in there and get a whole lot of leverage on a cut, which I am a really big fan of. One issue with the ergonomics that I've heard from the Umnumzaan, I haven't experienced this on mine, but this is kind of a busy area, and I've heard of some people getting blisters on their pointer finger from using this a lot. I have not got that. Maybe it's because my lockup is earlier. I can imagine if your lockup is later, that's creating more of like a gap in between the regular titanium and the lock bar, and maybe your finger is getting pinched in there and causing uncomfort, eventually causing that blister. So for ergonomics, I'm going to go with the Sebenza, especially the inlaid Sebenza. But yeah, that I guess is my final call with the ergos. The pocket clip is out of the way on both of them. It is in kind of a risky spot because it's so close to the end of the handle. You know, I would prefer to see the pocket clip somewhere in there so it rests in the middle of your hand and isn't as much of an issue. But this pocket clip sits in between my middle finger and my ring finger, and so I don't notice it at all in use. Now let's move on to the carry of these two knives. So we both have the same pocket clip, in my opinion, the best pocket clip in the game. It's got a double retention point, so it's not wiggling all around in your pocket, and it just is a little bit tighter down. Slides in great, has great retention, and there is a little bit hanging out for you to grab onto. The Umnumzaan feels a little bit heavier, but I'm going to go ahead and get a weight on these two. So for the Sebenza, we're looking at right under 4.5 ounces. And then on the Umnumzaan, we are looking right at 4.9. So the, let's just say the Sebenza is, or at least the inlaid Sebenza is about 1/2 ounce lighter than the Umnumzaan. This is not something that I really notice all that much in use, just because in jeans, almost all knives feel the same to me, unless they're like absurdly heavy, like 7-8 ounces. but I guess maybe in like gym shorts you could notice the difference between these two. Honestly, if I'm carrying a Sebenza in the summer where I'm wearing lighter weight clothes, I'm gravitating towards the small. But both of these carry fine. I have no issues with them. They're not that wide in the pocket, so they're not pocket hogs. But yeah, really no issues with the carry. But I guess since it is lighter, I will give it to the Sebenza. Now let's talk about the action of these two. So the action is both really good, or not really good. A bunch of people actually hate these actions. I actually don't mind them. I don't really have any issues with them. The Sebenza, the main complaint on it is everyone hates this sharp thumb stud. My thought is, I don't know if I've gotten used to it or what, but this thumb stud does not bother me at all. Like seriously, this is a knife that I don't mind flipping on the couch. I don't really play with my knives that much, but you know, I have this knife in my pocket all the time, so I do open it and close it a lot. And I take this thumb stud from an angle like this. A lot of people take it like your conventional thumb stud, press down and then flick out like that. And as you can see, that just like poked a divot into my finger. But when I do it right here, I have no issues with flicking. And as you can see, this thing drops shut to my finger. It doesn't really drop shut after that because it has some lock bar pressure to it, but there's no blade play on it. Very nice action. Really good to slow roll, which is how I mainly open my Sebenza. Because this has such a light detent, you're not really having to get over a big hump when you're opening it. So really nice to slow roll. That's how I do it. And it actually has a drop shut action, which impresses a lot of people because a bunch of people just trash Sebenzas for the action, but I think that they are actually really smooth. So the Umnumzaan, also the action doesn't bother me at all. As you can probably tell, don't really care about it all that much. It's just not as good in my opinion, because as you can see, this pivot is much bigger than the pivot on the Sebenza, so the blade almost has a little bit of a harder time to open it. Just imagine the path that the blade has to take. Is it easier for a path like that or a path like that? That's kind of, I hope that made sense. But since this has a larger pivot, the blade has to swing wider, or has to go around it more. Does that make any sense? I hope I'm making sense. But what that does is that just doesn't make the action as good. You kind of got to get used to the Umnumzaan. You almost push it up more like this rather than pushing it out like you would a normal thumb stud. But after you get used to it, no issues with that. These smooth out a lot over time. It kind of drops shut if I shake it a little bit. It's just not as good as the Sebenza. So action, I don't really care that much, but yeah, sure, I'll give it to the Sebenza. That's not going to play that big of a role in the final answer. But yeah, the Umnumzaan, I also really like closing it because this has a large area to where you were able to close the lock bar, and so I can put the pad of my thumb right there and easily close it like that. And so I like that part about it. For the value, they are both the same value, so I don't really have much to say about that. But I guess the winner of the value is determined by the winner I select. And I would suggest, or the knife that I choose for my, I guess the winner of this comparison is the Sebenza. Both great knives, but yes, I have to go with the Sebenza. I feel like the Umnumzaan, also a very good knife, but the only reason that it's not going to win over the Sebenza, it's a little bit more unique, probably a little bit more difficult to suggest to a lot of people. But once again, both are great knives. The Sebenza, it's just the best. It rules. It's my favorite knife. The ergonomics are perfect. Blade is great, and single blade shape is awesome. One of probably the best frame lock in the game. Umnumzaan, one of the best. Really good job by Reeve Knives. They make some of the best knives out there on the market, and I would highly suggest getting into them. So yeah, I guess that's going to be my winner here. I'm glad that's over. I would suggest going with the inlaid version of the Sebenza. I think that it is worth the money. I did a video on that. I did a dedicated video on that if you want to check it out. But yeah, that's all I got for today. Thank you guys for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed. If you had to choose Umnumzaan versus Sebenza, if you have both, let me know in the comments. If you don't have both and you just had to pick one, which one would you choose? But yeah, that's all I got for today. A little bit of a longer video just because I had a lot to talk about. My full review on this Sebenza was actually 50 minutes long. One of my favorite videos I've ever done. Didn't get many views though, just because it's such a long video and ain't nobody got time for that, which I understand. I don't really have time to watch my own 50-minute video. But anyway, that's all I got for today. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you guys in the next one.